Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on your Sunday afternoon. My name is Fred St. Amour, and I'm a volunteer with Bainbridge Prepares. We're very pleased to present this activity this afternoon. We consider it a training activity, an informational training activity for you. In our activities on the island, going around speaking with the residents and even non-residents of Bainbridge Island, folks who work here, guests coming over to the island, they understand that we live in a challenging area for natural disasters. They also understand that water will quickly become a primary focus of interest if one of those natural disasters occurs. And they have posed us some very, very challenging questions. So the objective here today is to help address some of those questions. Give me some help there, Cole. Advancing the slides. There we go. So we're part of Bainbridge Prepares, which is a nonprofit organization. It's a partnership with the city of Bainbridge Island and the Bainbridge Island Fire Department. And together, we're focusing on helping our islanders and also the businesses become better prepared for disasters. Hey, Cole, I'm going to need some help on this thing. Our WASH team is focused on water, sanitation, and hygiene. Three elements that quickly become in dire need in major emergencies, even as we have seen in the past 12 months. And our team's responsibilities include pre-disaster and post-disaster. Pre-disaster, we're focusing on training, such as this event, and also helping to plan what happens when that day occurs that we never want to occur. And then after the disaster, how do we help? How can we help the city and our residents, our businesses, and our guests quickly recover from that disaster? We're familiar with the winter storms here. How many of you experienced a power outage just a few weeks ago? Yeah. So we're very familiar with that. I've heard we've had some even worse storms in the past. More difficult, longer lasting. We're also familiar with the potential for fire. We run those risks in dry weather here on the island. It doesn't take long when you move here, look around all those big, beautiful trees, and then the first question is, if something lights up, how do I get out of here? What happens next? But we're also cognizant of earthquakes, and now potentially tsunamis. The aftermath here of the Fukushima earthquake struck me because there's a ferry sitting on that building. So as we go around in our training activities and in our planning activities, these are the primary circumstances that we're considering. How do we prepare for those? How do we advise folks to prepare themselves? And what plans can we establish for after the disaster to help people recover? During those discussions that we've had, those training sessions that we've had, well owners have expressed some significant uncertainties. They're not even really certain sometimes of how their well system is designed. Where are the pipes? What types of valves do they have installed? That's especially true for people who are on a joint system, more than one household on a system. It might be a neighborhood type of well system, and they're just not familiar with the design. They're also not familiar with the disaster impacts on wells. What could really happen if we have a wildfire, if we have a big shake, or even in a big storm? A big winter storm. They're concerned about measures that they could be taking now to improve the survivability of their well, and exactly what am I supposed to do after a disaster? Is there a checklist that I can apply? Go down that checklist so that I can check my well, check the system to make sure that I try to reactivate it in a safe manner. And finally, the last one. I've been very concerned that a lot of well owners are overly confident in their well's ability to survive a disaster. We have been told multiple times, I don't need to put up a store of water. I don't need really any other emergency supplies of water. My well will suffice. And we hope it does. But what if? What if it does not? And this is what prompted the idea for this seminar. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Serena Silva. Cole? From TerraPhase, who will give us the professional's perspective of these challenges.
Hello, everyone of Bainbridge. It is wonderful to see you on such a lovely rainy day. So today we're here to talk about all the lovely disasters that can happen to this island. Oh, Cole, please. And next. Perfect. So I am a groundwater scientist, and my mentor is a groundwater hydrogeologist of over 30 years. And we're here to talk with a depth of experience from both a education perspective that I educate folks, and he has decades of experience to answer every question of every concern. Next. So the variety of disasters that will happen or will happen in the future to this island, the disaster effect on each individual person varies by everything, and we hope that we're able to present some of the dangers of what will happen and some ways that you guys can work together to solve them. Next. We will start with Bainbridge's unique and difficult geology, why well owners here have all had to spend much money to dig very deep wells to access the several aquifers that are on your island. And every well is different. Sometimes we build them very shallowly to hit just the very top aquifer, but in some areas of the island, it is not deep enough, and we will get into a lovely map of your island. And not everyone has their own wells with the over 20 different joint and municipality water systems that are on your island. Next. The geology of Bainbridge is long and varied over the past 20 million years as the island has come together. Carved by glaciers, left large amounts of glacial till and sand and clay piles as the glaciers advanced and recessed over thousands of years, carving the island and making all the impressive bays and inlets that are so beautiful. The major changes that have happened recently have been our human involvement, how we've created roads, carved out bays, dredged them deeper for ferries, and so forth, as the island has become home to many people. With, as you can see, the primary color of the island, which this is a geologic map of the island, the grayish purple is glacial till, and it is extensive throughout the entire region, not just the island, and it is probably the thing that everyone has had the most difficulty digging any fence post in their life as they hit rock after rock after rock that you're just like, oh, lovely. There are also On the southern part of the island, there is the very lovely Blakely Formation, which has experienced extensive erosion due to the shoreline. And the continual effects as disasters will happen on our shorelines will be a continual problem that the island will have to face. Next. Perfect. So we'll start with some basics about aquifers. They are geologic units that are water-bearing, and there are two main categories, whether they are confined or unconfined. Unconfined are when you see a stream running down your little valley, that is an unconfined aquifer. It is both the stream itself and, depending on how thick the layer is, tens of feet to hundreds of feet thick of just unconfined flowing aquifer. The confined aquifer is the most commonly tapped for municipality water units, as it is more controlled in terms of keeping pollutants out of it and keeping the flavor and quality of the water consistent. You can see on the map the differences between a flowing artesianal well and an artesianal well. Flowing is when the pressure in the confined aquifer is enough that it is pushing out of the well, leaving plenty of room for not having to have a pump, and they're most likely the first tapped wells in the history that were part of the island in the early 1920s. Next. Perfect. Okay, so here are your main aquifers. These are the horizontal layers as they are defined by your own island. This map is courtesy of Bainbridge, the city of Bainbridge Island, as they mapped out all the different parts of their watershed and their delineations. Looking at this, you can see your own regions and how they're interconnected, and in how some areas, the hills and valleys carve out such lovely shapes. And it's important to know what is upstream of your location on top of knowing the general water quality of your aquifer. Thankfully, the city has provided that in their water quality reports that are easily accessible on their website. Next. Awesome. So, this is a great map of showing if you're in range for a joint municipality-style water system. And you have over 20 on the island, covering the vast parts of the heavily residential. There are gaps where there are your lovely parks or where the municipalities don't reach. If you don't have your own well, this is where you get your water. And all the different companies that run this vary in their preparedness. It's important to not only contact the representative of your well system, but also your neighbors so that you can help urge them to making more disaster preparedness. As for the larger production wells, 1,000 feet is usually the minimum for how deep they can get. You can have, especially on the the southern part of the island, you're going to see a lot of 1,300 and deeper wells that are very expensive to build and very hard for residents to build themselves. Next. Cool. The wells can be made out of most types of steel, usually most older wells can be made out of a milder steel, but as a low alloy steel is more corrosion resistant, and in a lot of residential wells, you'll have PVC liners in your wells, and that's most commonly seen when you're actually inspecting your home well and checking out the water system. A typical well lifespan is around 50 years, but it can be longer depending on how much maintenance you have for your well and depending on if your water is like corroding the well. Next. Okay. Residential wells. Most of them are going to be shallow-ish. Very few of them are going to be hundreds of, like more than 500 feet, though in some cases, especially with the geology on this island, you're going to have deeper wells. A dug well, which is the old style well, when you think of a well with that you drop a bucket down and people go and retrieve. They're usually not that deep and they don't have high production rates in terms of their flow as the rocks may break down and erode, just like the drilled wells, which use steel, can corrode. A driven well is created by pushing a pipe down with a drive shoe attached to the bottom of it. It is an older style of well construction with a very good return on its impact. Drilled wells, which use like rotary drilling with mud fluids, they can sometimes impact aquifers, but they're usually done much quicker, and a lot of residential wells like to use them because they are very fast. A couple of terms we got to learn. Static level is generally where your water will sit on a gate, like a day-to-day kind of thing. And the pumping level is when your well is on, it will drop from the static all the way to this level, and that's just the amount of water that you are impacting. Next. Okay. So very few people get to see what their inside of their well looks like. So this on the right side is what everyone is like associated with. You'll have your pressure tanks, you'll have maybe a pump, you'll have your water treatment, everything that you can to make the well reach your home. There are variations in how the setup is, but that is a very basic example of it. With if you have a submersible pump, you can have it down in the bottom. Sometimes you'll need a booster depending on how deep it is that you'll have at the top to just increase the pressure as it pulls it up into your house. Next. Okay, so raise your hand if you know your well. Oh, wonderful. Raise your hand if you know how to replace your well if anything breaks on it. Okay, so you can see that everyone knows that they have a well, that they have it, but they may not know the construction that went into it. They may not know how it's set, how deep it is, because the depth impacts what aquifer you're a part of, you may not know. Helpfully, the Department of Ecology for Washington State has a lovely resource that if you go to their website, which is very easily searched of, if you search ecology and wells, it will pop up because it is a very actively used resource. Your driller, when they made the well, should have submitted a report about how it was constructed, when it was constructed, and the recommendations for pumping level and whatnot. In a power outage, wells won't work because they need power, but a water system sometimes uses pressure and or gravity to feed water for a little bit. It's like when we have a power outage and we can still shower and use other things because we still have the water, but that's limited. And especially in a major disaster that this area is vulnerable to, the tiny supply that your water tank has will not be enough for a month, if not longer. Next. Okay, seismic hazards. At the top right, you can see active fault regions. And you can see in very tiny bit that there's a major one that crosses through the southern portion of Bainbridge Island, the Seattle Fault. That is a superficial fault that is part of the Seattle Thrust Fault quake. Moderately sized, it's caused by the rotation of the North American plate as it subducts the Juan de Fuca plate, a microplate that is just off our coast. The Cascadia subduction zone is where the Juan de Fuca plate is subducting under. And it leads to these large megathrust quakes that are the largest possible quake. In the 1950s, a 9.0 off a similar subduction zone in Chile happened, and it was devastating, to say the least. It took years and years for the city that was majorly affected, which was Santiago, to repair for the region, and there are still cracks in buildings when I last visited that are remnant of this major quake that they've never fixed. Next. Okay, so this lovely graphic is from USGS, and they show, the arrows show as a seismic wave hits an aquifer, how it kind of shakes and causes the water to drop and spike, just like if you were shaking a giant bowl of water. My favorite way to imagine this is if you take a bunch of sand in a bucket with water and you shake it, and you can kind of get all the water thrown to the top. The same thing can happen during an earthquake, in which the sediments in the aquifer can resettle, drastically shifting the aquifer and its properties. It is entirely possible during such a quake that your aquifer that you've been a part of for decades has moved or shifted in such a way that your well is not connected as well as it should be. Also, while a well is vertical and is less prone to damage in a quake, the infrastructure connecting to it, your water pipes, your tanks, especially the large municipality tanks, they are very vulnerable to breaking and bursting, causing that entire region of your water system to depressurize, which causes all that water you were counting on saving to feed the trees. It's the next one. Next. Yes, okay. So we actually have a lovely graph showing during the Nisqually quake that happened in 2001. And my boss actually did the field for this, and this is his, and he has a wonderful story about it.
So yeah, not many people have had a chance to be testing a well during an earthquake. I drew the short straw. So we were working on a brand new well for the city of Centralia, located kind of a little bit to the west of town, an area called Ford's Prairie. Fairly shallow well, gravel and almost cobbles and boulders, very coarse material from the glacial outwash was our aquifer. So this was laid down by water. And there have been earthquakes since the glaciers happened, so you'd think it would have been shaken into place. Excuse me?
Can you speak up a little bit, please?
Closer to the microphone?
Yes, it's very sensitive.
Wow, okay. I don't want to blow everybody's ears out. All right, so anyhow, I'm on site. We're testing a well. We've got our constant rate test going. We're going to run this test for 24 hours straight. We get started. We're about 10 minutes in to the test, and I feel a rumbling. Like I'm sitting next to a water well, about like this. Piano would be the water well casing. I've got a giant diesel engine on a truck with a drive shaft coupled to that pump in the well. That's maybe about here. Any sort of vibration or anything like that means run away. I didn't know what was going on, but I'm getting concerned. So I look over to see where everybody else is at. I watched waves coming across Ford's Prairie. So my colleague and the well driller are out there hanging 10, surfing. Craziest thing I've ever seen. I look up and I see the drill rig derrick doing one of these. Like, I should run away now. There's about 5 inches of slip yoke engaged in that drive shaft. Truck goes one way, pump goes another way. I'm in the propeller zone where the drive shaft will be spinning around, and that engine's not going to stop. So I ran away. So did the water. This is our pumping water level. We're chasing it down. This is manual measurements as best as I could do. I did run away a little bit here. But we're pumping away, and I came back, and all of a sudden I can't find the water. We're down another couple of feet. This pump inlet's down here. So when I test wells, the boss tells me to take the well within inches of its ultimate limit because as a hydrogeologist, we're out there to define those limits. People want to know how far they can push that well. So we were pushing it, but the way it works is this will kind of settle out asymptotically. We'd have been fine. It was diving. I didn't know where it was going to stop. It was also pumping silt, sand, very brown water. Water was crystal clear before the earthquake, and we watched another 2 feet of drawdown just go away instantaneously, and I wasn't going to kill the well, so I cut the pumping rate back to 1,300 gallons a minute instead of 1,500. And it ruined the test. We really can't analyze that. So anyhow, should I have just watched it ruin the well, or should I ruin the test? We can reaccomplish a test, which is what ultimately we had to do. But what happened was the earthquake was significant enough to shake the formation and resort things, and the well was drawing that water from that aquifer in at a very high rate. So anything that got shaken loose got sucked into the well. This does bad things for your pump. Pumps don't like to pump sand. They tend to lock up. They tend to wear out. It also is creating a void down in the ground, which probably is going to destabilize your well if that keeps pumping sand and gravel. So it's an interesting graph to put up on the wall now, but at the time it was terrifying because you don't know what is happening. You don't know what's going on. You know it's an earthquake, but you don't know how bad it is because I didn't know how close I was to the epicenter. Am I going to be able to get home? Are the bridges still intact? I'm way the heck down in Centralia. I live in Tacoma. So in this case, we didn't break the casing. The well casing was steel, and it was robust enough to where it held up. The well was still straight enough to where we could get the pump in and out. That's not always the case. I'm dealing with 20-inch diameter steel pipe. That's pretty rigid, pretty good, 3/8 inch thick wall, so it's pretty strong stuff. Typical residential well is going to be 6-inch steel pipe with 1/4-inch wall. It's a noodle. You don't think pipe bends, but I can assure you that I've seen 16-inch pipe when they were putting gas line in Fife, 16-inch pipe snaking around like a worm. And that's also 3/8 inch wall. So a 6-inch pipe is going to be a lot less rigid. So it will bend. If the seismic waves move the top one direction and the bottom another direction, say in the vicinity of a fault zone, that pipe is no impediment to that fault. So another thing that can happen, your pump is hanging on plastic, most likely. Most drop pipe in residential wells is Schedule 120, so fairly thick wall PVC. It's affordable, it's relatively inert, it works pretty good, lasts a long time, and it's flexible enough. But in an earthquake, you start wiggling it around, it's going to bang your pipe into the sides of the well because it's not rigid, and there may not be a torque arrestor or centralizer above your pump to keep it from slamming into the sides of the well. So that can crack the pump off of the pump bowls. Pump bowls are generally cast iron. Cast iron does not bend. It's generally brittle. It'll just snap. When that happens, the motor winds up falling down. It just hangs there by its power wires, and there's no connection to the pump. So things can break there. If the casing bends, you might not be able to get the pump back out of the well. It will come up so far, but it will bind. Let's see, what else can go wrong? The biggest one, like Serena said, pipes and valves and stuff horizontally in the ground, because the seismic waves move things horizontally. They'll stretch things apart, pull things together. You've all seen pictures of railroad tracks after an earthquake. They're not straight. They tend to curve. That's what happens to pipelines too. And you've got a pipe between your well and your house. What's that pipe made of? Is it made of plastic? You're probably okay. Is it made of steel or iron? Maybe not. Those don't bend as much. Valves are going to be a weak link, because the valve is a cast material versus, you got a steel pipe or a plastic pipe. That valve might be the weak link. So know where your parts are, know what's there, and ideally your well's not pumping during the earthquake, because if it's not pumping, there's not that bias into the well. You don't have the flow coming towards the well. Sure, the aquifer shook up, but the well's not inhaling it. The well's just sitting there waiting, and when it's safe to turn it back on, your well might puff up a little bit of sand, it might pump a little bit of silt. Be ready for it. If it doesn't stop, be concerned. If it does stop, usually it'll clear its throat in 15 minutes or so. Depends on the well, depends on the situation, but usually they'll clear up. If it clears up, you're probably fine. But if you don't know how to do that, you might not understand that, we had an earthquake, power's out. I should probably flip the breakers on my pump to make sure that my pump doesn't turn on until I'm ready for it to turn on. Just another thing to think about. Got all kinds of other things to worry about, but if you turn the pump off and turn it on in a controlled fashion, you're in control with what's going on. It's not just going to automatically switch on. Most pumps are pressure demand. So if you recall Serena's water system diagram, you either have a water tank or you have a pressure tank. There's a switch that's going to tell the pump, I need to turn on now because the water tank is low. If that switch turns on, yet power's off, the well's going to immediately kick on as soon as your power comes back on. Normally that doesn't matter, because normally earthquake's not what turns our power off. It's a tree falling on a power line, which, no fun, but that can be fixed. So I guess the biggest thing is, remember that most wells don't operate all the time. Odds are if you're on a municipal well, those operate more frequently. If you're on a domestic well, you're watering the lawn, the well's going to cycle on and off. It's not running continuously. Normally, the well produces more water than the house can use. So we try to do a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1 or a 4-to-1 duty cycle, meaning the well runs a quarter of the time or less, ideally. So no demand, no well operation. So if you're not using water, your well shouldn't be on. Just know that there may be some steps to take to turning your well on. So we had a bunch of people with hands up that said they know their well. Do you know exactly where your well is? Do you know what your static and pumping water levels are? Okay. Measuring those is not easy. You got to have a wire that reaches down it, and you got to have a way to measure that wire. 500-foot deep well, nobody's going to have a spool of 500 feet of wire in their yard. I don't, and I'm that guy. So, but you can look at how your pump is operating. If you understand how the pump operates and you have basic voltmeters, ammeters, things like that, you can determine whether or not your pump's operating within its appropriate parameters as you bring it back online. There's kind of a self-reliance thing involved with water wells. You don't just get to flip a switch and walk away. There is some maintenance required. You do have to know a little bit about them. That said, they can be really reliable and last a really long time. Oftentimes, people will live in a house, they've had a well the whole time, they've never even seen it. I have worked for people that did not know where their well was. They knew they were on a well, they didn't know where it was, they didn't know what it was. I had to go find the well. So you have a utility locator come out and you chase the line from the house over to the landscaping, and they'd buried it. Perfect. So anyhow, the more you know, the less you got to guess. The less you got to guess, the more safely you can bring the well back online after an event like this. And if you've got questions about specifics, I can try. I've worked with wells and water systems for over half my life. So I've seen a few things. I know a little bit. Next slide.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about more of the specific disasters and how they can affect this did not update. Oh, whatever. Okay, so lovely bottom. The services at the Lahaina wildfire did not come back immediately. It's still not back all the way. It has, I think, like 60 something percent restored after over a year of the wildfire damages. With the recent wildfires in Hollywood and Southern California in general, it will take a long time. Fire is surprisingly dangerous to not just the plastic pipes, but the seals that we put on piping can melt and break during fires. Also, I don't think fire is great for any electrical component. They just kind of break everything with it. And that, like, flame damage is probably because of how our water systems are going to be shallower, because of our lovely glacial till that is very hard to dig in. No one wants to dig like 10 plus feet down most of the time, and they have it within the 5 to like 8 range of like depth. Next. Okay, tsunami. All of the quakes that are going to happen in our region will cause an effective tsunami. If it's the Seattle fault, that tsunami's origin is in the sound itself. The University of Washington has a modeling program showing simulations about how that will devastate areas. They cut Bainbridge Island in half, so you have to watch 2 separate videos, which is why I didn't include it. The saltwater intrusion on any shallow well. If folks live on the shore, that saltwater intrusion can break your well. It can mix in, and most pumps that pump fresh water aren't great for pumping salt water. And I don't really like the taste of salt water. Not my cup of tea. However, Bainbridge Island is one of the first in Washington, I believe, tsunami-ready cities, and they've been preparing for it and are a great resource, along with Bainbridge Repairs. The inundation, which is when a tsunami wave comes in, is devastating, and especially if you go somewhere on the ocean coast, you can see how a massive wave will come in. But sometimes it's more than one wave, and it's repeated waves, especially with how the Seattle fault is and the sound. It is essentially a basin that we're shaking, and the water will slosh back and forth, just like a water bucket, which is not great if you live on the coastline, so it is one thing to be prepared for with your water system. Next. Okay. So signs that there are a problem in your well. The top part is the inside wire casing of a brand new well. Looks silvery, looks shiny, steel, perfect. This bottom picture is a well that hasn't been maintained and at some points has been off for longer periods of time. This leads to an accumulation of bacteria. This bacteria isn't harmful except for the production of your well. This bacteria can plug all of the holes of your screen. You can see how it's just completely filled because this is the exact same screen from the same well. I think this one had like a 5-year. I think that was what this one was, because this was one of the ones you were surprised at. 3, yes, 3 years, which was very surprising because we were not expecting after 3 years to look like it hasn't been serviced in 40 years. This happens. Wells are the perfect place to grow iron and manganese bacteria. They love our wonderful sediments because they have lots of iron and manganese, which I think everyone who has their own water system has had to do a treatment system to get that manganese taste out of their water. Most people can't look at the bottom of their well, but we have cameras that can scan and go down a well to look and see what is happening. If you see that your well is pumping out, and it's not clear water, it's pumping out greenish, grayish water, You're obviously going to be like, turn on your tap and be like, why is my water gray? That's a sign you should probably reach out and try and figure out what is happening here. If you keep a record of your well, some modern like wells can have like an electronic logging of when they're running and how much they're running. If you have something like that as part of your water system, it's easier to see beforehand because you may not notice that your water is taking longer to reach you. Most people just be like, the water, it's here, it shows up. But it's like a hidden clock that's ticking as the production slows and slows. With a lot of our clients, we can see that they talk to us that say, oh yeah, over the past 5 years, the well has dropped by like a factor of 10. So it used to make 1,500, now it's making 150. And you're like, why didn't you tell us when it started doing that? And they're like, well, now it makes 15 and we need help. And it's like, oh, got it. And the static water level, it is really good at showing your connection to the aquifer as a whole. Like a straw, as you stick it in water, water comes up out. Like, not out, but it comes up to a certain point, and that's your static water level. It is different than the aquifer, and it is a great way to show your connection to it. If it, over time, starts to lower, and you're like, well, 5 years ago, it was at 500 feet, but now it's at 600 feet, that's like awesome. Your connection to the aquifer has decreased for whatever reason. Sediment likes to flow. A well is a giant vacuum that pulls water to it, but it also pulls sediment. And the finer the sediment, the easier it is to come forward and clog your screens. Bacteria aren't the only thing that clogs your screen. The other thing that we get a lot of that clogs screens are sand. We've talked about how an earthquake can shake up the sediment and bring it to you, but over regular use, little bits of sand will start to be pulled into your well. And a little bit of sand isn't bad. We aim when we make wells to have 1 part per million of sand. If you're starting to make feet of sand in a day, you might have a sand well, less than a water well. Next. Awesome. So, recommendations for pre-disaster prep. You got to know your well system. Got to have your diagram, got to know where it is, and make yourself a little operating manual. Every pump is different, has its own manual, and I can't remember all of them. So it's good to have a copy of it so that when you go to look at how to fix it, how to deal with your own issues that may run into it, you're like, here is my binder of information, here's everything I know. It makes it a lot easier. You want to make sure that your water treatment's up to date, that everything is good. It's not great to use corroded piping or just generally old material that hasn't been updated in a long time. The seals may break and it may cause more issues, and the older metals are more vulnerable to damage during a seismic event. If you know and can prepare, it is good to have like a store of surplus parts that are easily repaired during a break. If your sampling port, which lets you check, it's essentially just a little valve before your water system enters your house that allows you to look at the water and see that it's clear, it's not turbid, it's not full of sand, and they're very prone to breaking. They are very tiny, very frail things that can break easily. And thankfully, you can just use a wrench, unscrew it, and put it back on. As for power, during fires, during earthquakes, power is difficult. Most people don't have their own power system for their house, let alone a well. Having a generator that you can run at times can supplement any power gaps. Since wells don't have to run all the time, you wouldn't have to run it all the time. During disasters, you want to have at least 30 gallons of water per person, and the more, the merrier. And if your filtration system is compromised, if you live on the coast and your filtration system is now full of salt, it is good to have backups that are in like sealed containers that are protected. Next. Okay, so after a disaster, after a large quake, after you understand that your family, your friends, your neighbors, and everyone is safe, you can focus on your well. It's more important to focus on people because we are not replaceable, unlike our wells, which are replaceable with just money. First thing you gotta do, you gotta check it, gotta see if it's doing good. Hopefully you flip the power, hopefully that you can listen to it. Wells are echo chambers that you can hear very well. You can't necessarily hear them when the pump is on, because that's all you can hear is that loud pump noise. But when it's off, you can hear pretty clearly. And if you hear rushing water through a well, that is a bad sign. Wells are trying to have the water pull in very slowly because the slower it pulls in the water, the less likely it is to pull sediment with it, to pull in all this sand or in some places gravel if the water power is strong enough. If you can hear that rushing water, it means that there is another breakage or entry point into your well, which means your aquifers might be connected, which is a really bad sign and is easier for your well to not only be contaminated, but now to act as like a bridge to contaminate multiple aquifers, which since there are only 4 major aquifers on your island, we have to work together as a team to protect them. And stopping these inner aquifer connections from mixing each other is very, very important and is something that the Department of Ecology and the Department of Health both focus on when making wells. Once you've checked that there's no breakage, it's no unusual, no, it's all good. Now you can turn on your pump and you can slowly go through the process. There are checklists about how to make sure that your pump is running correctly, using things like a voltmeter to check how much it's using, and then sampling through your sampling port to make sure that it is good, clear water as opposed to sandy, turbid water. During things like an earthquake, it's important to wait. The sediment will settle after a while, and that is the best point to check. 30 plus minutes after a quake, a lot of the water and sediment will settle, except for things like clay. Once you've checked that's good and secured yourself and family, you can contact people like Bainbridge Prepares to assist with everything. Community networks are very, very important during any type of natural disaster, because I don't think anyone alone can have enough money, have enough resources and time to fully prepare themselves. But if one neighbor has these supplies, another has those supplies, together, y'all can survive however long it is. A mega thrust quake like Cascadia is at a big risk to your bridge. And that connection being broken means a lot of resources for your island will take longer to get to. And in a quake like that, major cities like Seattle, Tacoma, and Portland will be devastated and a major focus from relief organizations. And so having the community of the island together, y'all can get past it. Now, if you notice that your well is broken, it has this rushing feeling, then you need to contact help so that we can do things like send a camera down to check to see how bad the damage is. If it's just a minor break, there are options that you can line it. You can do other things to do it. If not, we'll have to then decommission it, which is a process that can be covered if you get there. Next. You aren't alone. As I was saying, a community together is very good at resisting all disasters. Building connections is great. If you don't own a well, if you are on an apartment or a condo or something where you don't even have the space to store it, you could work with other members of your condo or your housing to build connections and speak with the owners or the housing developments to work on a residential community together, building like, hey, maybe we want to add large access tanks that we can use in the event of a disaster. Map Your Neighborhood program, which I was introduced when I was learning more about y'all. Great program, highly recommended, and it is amazing for natural disasters. And now I'm going to talk about a lovely system called Shake Alert. Prepared by the USGS in combination with several universities, it is a lovely program that notifies and allows automated actions to happen. But the basic little thing is it can save people. If you're on the coast, it can, hey, tell you that there's a tsunami that might be coming or a major earthquake just happened very fast, especially with the megathrust quake. If you're on the coast, you do not have that much time before a tsunami will hit since you're already so close. Next. Okay, so Shake Alert allows a lot of automated things to happen. One of the more useful processes that a community can do is pair with a technical partner and have an alert delivered to everyone as a part of your network or Bainbridge Prepares that says, hey, here is a major quake in your area. Be advised, you may be feeling it. Shake Alert as a system, it calculates the area of feeling within like a tenth of a second of the quake happening and immediately delivers the results within like 5 seconds. It is a very, very fast system. And you can have it hooked into schools. There are many schools, there are many cities that have their own integrated Shake Alert systems. Now, as for own your own wells, you can have it do things like automatically turn your pump off. If you use an actuated valve, you can have it that as soon as a quake is detected in your region, it will be faster than the quake reaching you unless you are at the epicenter, allowing you to do a lot of these protective measures ahead of time. Especially like you could have it set up so that it tells people about this as a sign over bridges, over any public areas. Generally, a very helpful system that if you want to know more, you can talk to technical partners or people who can happily set it up. Like we can get you guys hooked into that system if it is necessary or if it's desired, and allow y'all to have an extra warning system that may not be as expected. Next. Okay. So I'm sure you guys have questions. So raise your hand and we can answer your questions. There'll be a microphone delivered to y'all, and we are happily here to answer it.
Okay, thank you very much, Serena. We are going to go straight into questions. One thing I want to make sure of is we will be posting the video and audio of this presentation and along with the presentation itself on the Bainbridge Prepares website this coming week. So you'll have handy reference to that should you so need. So what questions do you have for us today? Yes, ma'am.
This is for my neighborhood.
Okay.
We were listed on there. Okay. How can we reinforce our concrete holding tank?
The question was, in our neighborhood, we have a concrete holding tank. How can we reinforce that concrete holding tank?
What shape is it? Cylinder? That's good. Cylinder is a lot better than a box. Boxes have corners, corners fail. So the cylindrical tanks, you can probably talk to a structural engineer, but if it's tied to the ground and it's not got any structural deficiencies or cracks, you could band it with steel bands and tension those bands. If it's really bad, you can wrap it and then tension bands. So there are options.
You can also install valves that when break, they'll isolate parts of the system and automatically shut off. Next question.
What are You had mentioned that you went out and found this pump by following the pipe. And we've got a Group B system here with 9 residences on it, and none of the engineering diagrams, even the current ones, are remotely based on what they are. But all the pipes are PVC, so we can't go out with a pipe reader. And we've even had people come out from some of the supposed pipe, field finders and stuff like that. And they said, if you have a leak, you might be able to find it because it'll make a certain noise. But if the water's either not flowing or it's flowing without any impediment, it's almost impossible to find out where they are. And now this system's been in since, I'll say 1970, and it's been upgraded. So, we've been trying to figure this out for years. We were hooked up with a Group B system management with KPUB, and nobody's been able to help us zero in on this to find out where the pipes are.
Do you know where one end is?
In the house.
Well, we've got 9 residences, so
Right. So if you know where an end of the pipe is, you open the pipe, put a wire in it, feed the wire down, and you can locate it that way. You can flush water through the pipe to move the wire along, and you'll use a utility locator. The other thing, pipes are harder to find than wires. Wires are easy to find, so you trace your wires just fine, but normally they dug them in the same ditch. So if you've got a main line going from the well to a home, power and water are likely very close together.
well, we've got the pump house, and then we go out to Blakely, which is 50 feet, and then we go down the street.
Oh, okay. So you've got hundreds and hundreds of feet of PVC line. That's that's great. I run a Group B system that's almost as well documented, so I feel you. You can pothole strategically if you know where valves are. You can do things like that, but documenting that's going to be a real challenge. Just anytime anybody opens up the dirt, you might be able to find things. Other options are, do you know where valves are? You can close a valve partially. Oh, perfect.
They show up on the engineering map, but they're not there.
Wow. Yeah. Again, if yours was the only one like that, I'd say, gosh, that's terrible. But nearly everyone I've worked on is improperly documented. My stepdad was tearing up his whole yard trying to find his water line because it wasn't where the drawing had it. So, yeah, pretty common. Sorry, I don't have a better answer.
Right here.
I've got a quick question. Can you comment on the, we're talking about wells, but so many of us are on drain fields and septic systems, which will also be breaking. Can you talk about who's upland from me and if they break and how it might affect my water quality and if there's some testing we should be doing no matter what?
Septic systems are absolutely vulnerable. The biggest vulnerability being the horizontal pipelines between the components of it. During an earthquake, though, the tank is going to sit there and slosh back and forth. Usually tanks are rectangles. Rectangles are weak, so the corners may crack or break. How would you know? Well, open up the tank and see if there's anything left in it. There's probably going to be something left in it. You may have water coming into it from infiltration from high water table. It's hard to say. But is it going to function-ish? Probably. Is it going to be an outward sign that that septic system has failed immediately after an earthquake? Probably not, because drain fields take a long time to plug up completely. If you've broken a line between the tank and your drain field or your home and your tank, yeah, you'll know right away. But it might be years before you recognize that something's separated. So an inspection would be great, but like everything else, I'm sure we've all got perfect septic as-builts for our septic systems right next to our perfect as-built for our water system. I have mine because I drew it, but
Specifically thinking about the neighbors who are up from the wellhead. If they break and they have contaminated something, and then the wellhead breaks, or
yeah, the worry there is if something breaks and it's not caught for a long time, yes, you could migrate shallow contamination down, and it could reach your wellhead, breach the surface seal, or impact your well. If you're on a Group B system, there's regular sampling. If you're on a Group A system, it's even more regular sampling. So routine stuff will catch it, but by the time you've caught it, you already have a problem. So things to be concerned about, hard to say. Depending on where you're at. I mean, if you're in a soil that perks very well, you may never know your drain field or your septic tank is compromised. I've seen that plenty of times where my stepson's house, the pipe came out of the house, never even made it to the septic tank. He lived there for 5 years, no problems. Had 20 people over, and all of a sudden he's got a problem. So, yeah.
Can I talk to that just a second? The other part to that, with the sanitation component, is to filter and treat after an earthquake. This is one of the things that we talk about in our presentations, but recognizing there may be contamination coming in that you don't immediately identify, this gives you that opportunity to take care of yourself and your family by filtering and treating the water, even if you think everything is just fine. Okay, so.
You mentioned clogged screens. Is that in a drilled well, and is that from your diagram located at the bottom of the well?
Yes.
And do we replace it every 5 years, and how do we do that?
Okay, so on a residential well, it's probably a 50-50 shot whether or not you even have a wire wrap screen in your well. Some need them, some don't. We use the screen as a strainer to hold the aquifer out and let the water in. Some wells don't need that. They've got a coarse enough material that the open bottom of the pipe is sufficient to allow the water to just pass up into the pipe, and it works fine. So the more you know about your well, the more you find out that you need to know about your well, the sad fact of it. But I look at a lot of wells that are larger capacity wells, larger production wells, even some small Group B systems still have wire wrap screens. I mean, the Group B system I manage is a wire wrap screen. That wire wrap screen is made of stainless steel, and the spacing is selected by the hydrogeologist or engineer that designed the well to hold the formation out, let the water through. Serena mentioned bacteria. Bacteria is prevalent, it's everywhere, it's in the water, and when we put steel pipe in the ground, we just gave them a banquet. So we put steel pipe underwater, there's bacteria, so that bacteria is going to say, oh, hey, this is wonderful, I love it here. You've also got water that was moving very slowly. It accelerates and moves a lot faster to come into a well and move through the pump and go into your water system. That also brings a lot of nutrients to the bacteria around a water well. They say, oh, I've got a buffet and they keep bringing me more food. This is wonderful. So I've seen biofouling way, way worse than the one we had on the screen there. That one was extreme just because it was only a couple of years. I've seen them where the screen is completely plugged, like I couldn't pass the camera through the screen. Does it happen? Yeah. Does it happen a lot? I've seen that, but I only go, you got to remember, I only go look at a well when it's broken. Nobody calls me, come look at my perfectly good well. I want to spend money for nothing. Sure, okay. I actually tell people not to do that because the surest way to break a well is to mess with it. If it's working, drive it, run it, monitor it, pay attention. Know what your pumping water level is, know what your static water level is, know how your pump, know what rate it's supposed to produce, know how long it operates. That's an easy one for you folks on just a standard little domestic well. Turn your your tap on, let it run, and your pressure tank will bleed down. And then as soon as the pump kicks on, you'll hear a chunk, and then you'll hear the pump start whirring. Close the valve. See how long it takes to fill itself back up. If it takes 5 minutes to fill itself back up, great. Check it next year. If it takes 10 minutes, maybe your screen's a little plugged. Maybe things are going wrong. If it takes 20 minutes, maybe something's really wrong. If it takes 4 minutes, well, you weren't accurate enough on timing the first time. So they generally don't go faster. But what we would do is we would, if you have a blocked screen or your well's plugged up, drillers can come in with a tool or set of tools that they lower down inside the well to clean it out and scrub it out. So wells can be cleaned. usually multiple times without any degradation of the well. A lot of what I do as a hydrogeologist is go clean up wells because people, like Serena said, run them until they're done. You know, it used to make 1,500 gallons a minute, now it makes 150 gallons a minute. We need help. Yeah, you needed help 5 years ago, but here we are. The further down the path it goes, the less likely we get all the way back to where it was, because that bacteria incrustation gets more and more resistant the longer it's there.
I have another question. What is the best practice for, let's say, a 550-gallon tank for additives? Do you put Clorox in it? And do you recommend a water filter for your house?
What's your tank made of?
It's made of plastic.
Plastic is okay to use some mild chemicals in, but you can actually degrade a plastic tank by putting too aggressive a disinfectant into it. So you'd need to know the manufacturer of the tank. You'd need to know what they recommend. Clorox, I don't like Clorox straight up because it's usually scented and usually gross, but chlorine works. The problem with chlorine as a disinfectant, though, is you need to control the pH level. If the pH gets too high, it doesn't work as a disinfectant. So there are products out there that are also NSF 61 certified that can be used to disinfect, that kind of control the pH and buffer things. But I would worry about this if you have a disinfection problem. If you don't have a disinfection problem, enjoy it. And one in the back.
Does Bainbridge have estimates on how many residential wells might fail in a given size earthquake? Are we talking 2% of the wells are going to fail, or 80% are going to fail?
Depends on the earthquake. I mean, magnitude 9 quake, we're probably going to worry more about other things than residential wells. Magnitude 7 quake, we'll see probably some wells fail. But wells themselves are pretty resilient. Like I said, they're vertical, and the damaging ground shaking is horizontal, so the well just goes back and forth like a noodle. If you have a fault where your well goes through the fault and the fault moves in differential motion, one side goes right, one side goes left, that'll do bad things to a well because the fault isn't going to notice your well was there.
Hi, I'm actually a hydrogeologist too, so when I bought my house 5-6 years ago, I immediately tried to look for the well log. It doesn't exist. I mean, you said this in college, you said there is no well log. I think the well was drilled about 20 years ago or so, but I don't understand how there cannot be a well log for this well. Is this something you guys see all the time?
Oh, yeah.
I'm working on 2 24-inch diameter wells for the city of Redmond that don't have well logs. They were drilled in 2005. So that's right in your time frame. Things happen. Laws are laws, rules are rules, and people break them. So if your well was drilled back in the 60s, 70s, yeah, the record keeping was a lot more lax. There's also a possibility that your well log is over in eastern Washington because someone didn't know how to do township section, range, and quarter section. Wouldn't be the first time I've seen that. Or I've seen wells in Puget Sound. So search on the property owner name for the previous owners. You can also search on parcel numbers, things like that. But
Ecology, not the county.
yeah,
Likely to be with ecology.
Ecology is the master database. However, you may find a well on your building permit for the original construction of the house because they had to have proof of water to build the house. So
The well, it's been tested. Before I bought it, I had to test it, but there's no well log, so I was just puzzled.
yeah, you're not the only one, unfortunately. The majority of recent well logs are documented. Does it have a unique well ID tag on the well by chance? No. Okay, well then you may be out of luck. You're not the only one.
Just a quick note, tremendous resource of the Department of Health in terms of what they have in their files. If you have a system that has its own name and it's registered and it's got a certificate number and stuff, it's a piece of cake. You go down there to Bremerton and you can look up, and they've got files down there. They've been in the process of digitizing But I went in there once and I spent like 2 days just going through file after file, and it was a wealth of information.
A lot of that's online now too, so you can do it in the comfort of your own home.
If it's not a registered well, if it's just on a standalone little property, that may not be the case.
The Department of Ecology handles the individual well records, and those are usually filed by unique well ID. So if you've got a tag on your well with letters and numbers, say State of Washington, unique well ID, and you can look that up and find the exact record, provided they did their paperwork.
It's what you hear in front.
We're on a community well for about 20 homes, and it's owned by KPUD. And I'm wondering if you can provide some guidance. How can we effectively work with them? They don't want us opening things and tinkering with the well.
So KPUD's hydrogeologists are all good friends of mine. I've worked with the last two, and though I didn't work with them, I drank plenty of beer with the one prior. So they know what I know, and they know the wells, and they're probably acutely aware of what's going on. They're going to be spread really thin after a disaster because they don't just manage your water system. So perhaps you can conjunctively come up with a checklist or something like, hey, I will take care of the easy stuff. You guys deal with the harder stuff. But if I don't see glaring issue number 1, 2, or 3, I can report that. Although phones probably won't work and other things probably won't work either. So partnering with KPUD is probably the best way to do it. I don't know what their policies are, though, but Tom's a great guy.
Aside from being a great guy, you got to take care of yourself. Okay, and that's part of the point of this presentation. We all know that there's intersections and co-use, joint use, all right? But let's all close our eyes and imagine the day that we don't want to imagine. KPUD is not going to be answering the phones. They're not going to have enough techs on the island. Everyone's going to be doing their best. But, madam, it's up to you to take care of your family and all the families connected to that well. And that's one of the important points that we want to make sure everyone understands. Whoever owns that well, via con Dios. You got to take care of yourself. Make sure that you know how to take care of that well, that residential well, reactivate it if it's safe. But let's not bet the farm on it. Let's not bet that the septic system is not going to run into the well. Let's have stored water. Let's have an alternative plan. Let's be realistic about those plans. More questions? Right here.
Hi, Fred. So a little bit of background. I'm the executive director of Bainbridge Repairs, and what that means is that Fred and Eric tell me what to do quite a bit. But I wanted to take a moment, but a few things. One is to thank the WASH team, Fred and Eric, and the crew there for organizing this presentation. Thank TerraPhase for the wealth of information they have. Also, thank you for the forgiveness of being a little crowded today. I think there was a little bit more turnout than we anticipated, so thank you for the forgiveness there. But I did want to talk some PSAs about some of these bullets. The first is, and I'm going to keep politics out of this, and I'm just going to indicate some of the directives and how they're affecting some of the bullets up there. TerraPhase mentioned the tsunami team that we were working with at the state. So this week we found out that essentially that team is almost certainly going to be shuttered by summer because of some of the funding challenges between federal and state. I can't confirm that the entire team is going to be shut down, but we know a number of people that are going to be let go. If you go to the Bainbridge Repairs website or the COVID website about the tsunami hazard awards that we received, we can basically point to the people from the state that aren't going to have jobs by the end of August. So just FYI there. And the other reason I'm bringing that up is that Shake Alert was mentioned. Shake Alert is something that we looked at very deeply. Both WASH team and a couple of our other teams looked at Shake Alert. We don't know if that's going to last. That's a USGS led program that we don't know if the funding is going to be there at the federal level in the next year. It may, we just don't know. And so it's just one of those things where, to Fred's point, the big helicopters are almost certainly not coming. And so the expertise is you all and the people in this room, because we don't know what other levels are out there in 6 months or 6 years. So, PSA on that.
Other general questions? Yes, sir.
Is there any danger to, if you have a well that's operating correctly, to basically pulling the maximum water out of it? Say the context is you have a generator and a well, and your neighbors do not have a generator, and you want to basically maximize pulling water out. Is there a risk besides, burning up the pump?
Every well has limits, so every well is unique. Every limit set is unique. I mean, like I mentioned during the talk on the well test, I go out and try to find those limits. I don't recommend any of you all do that. That said, if it's operating right and your neighbors need something to drink, by all means, open the tap. So not everybody's going to have a 240 volt generator capable of powering their pump in their well. And those that do, it's great. You're a good neighbor to have.
Yes, ma'am, right here.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about the saltwater intrusion and whether that's temporary versus permanent and deep or shallow wells?
Oh, sure. How long do you want to stay? I'm here all day. So, saltwater intrusion from inundation. If the wellhead goes underwater, it's not just flowing down the wellhead, it's also flowing into the sediments. And will it go away? Yeah. When? How much rain are we going to get? How long is it going to take for nature to flush itself out? It might take decades. So undoubtedly, there have been earthquakes in the past that have resulted in the sloshing back and forth, the seiche, as they're defined. And Bainbridge has been partially inundated in the past. It'll happen again. And there's fresh water in the aquifers now, but that's because rain has fallen on the land and it's percolated down and recharged and flushed out the salt. So don't count on it happening overnight. Your 30 gallons or whatever of water is probably not going to be enough to outlive that, but reverse osmosis can take salt out of water as well as just about any other thing, but you got to have enough water and enough power to do it. Sorry for the non-answer.
We have a question back here.
Question back here. I thank you for a presentation. It's very informative. Two questions. Is there a manual solution that could be used if the power goes out and you don't have a generator? And question number two is, are there connections that you can install that are earthquake proof to be able to tap the water from the storage tank? In other words, if there is a big quake, the connections there are going to break, and it would be, I'd hate to lose a source of 1,200 gallons worth of water that we have.
Okay, to answer question one, y'all remember the pump at summer camp where you pulled the arm up and down? Those exist, but you got to have it installed in your well. It's not like you're going to have that sitting in the garage and go, oh, earthquake, yeah, let me go ahead and put that in. You're not going to pick up the existing pump that's there. So if you don't have a way to retrofit a second pump in your well, that's going to be really hard to do. And it should be there in place prior to the disaster. But then it's sitting there as a potential avenue for contamination and problems. So I'm not sure I'd recommend that. Question number two. If we think we're going to make an earthquake-proof coupling, Mother Nature will throw a better earthquake at us. We can absolutely make earthquake-resistant couplings, and a lot of the municipal systems I work with are doing that for their earthquake resilience. So it's pipes that can telescope and or offset, or both, during seismic actions. And while they're not cheap, they're effective. But retrofitting them is costly. It involves interrupting service, and you'd have to get engineers and people involved well prior. So it could be part of a resiliency plan, but don't count on them being there. This is a recent thing.
So, folks, one of the things we want to do is get you to walk through in your mind what your system is. Take a look at that system and be critical of it. Take photographs of it. Make sure that you can get a diagram of it. But if you have a tank and you have outlets on the bottom of that tank You're sticking your face out to a trained boxer with a glass jaw. That's the first point of failure. So if there is a way to redesign the piping on your tank so that you do not have fittings on that tank proper, that they can go in through the top and out through the top, suction out, flow in. Avoid potential risks of having a snap in that line. Valve or no valve. You can have a valve on the pipe coming out of it, and the connection to the tank, that bunghole adapter, whatever that is, that can still fail and drain that tank in a New York second. Okay? Even on major municipal systems. In the Loma Prieta earthquake in 1989 in San Francisco, the tanks held. The pipes and the connections did not. So think about redesigning the piping that goes into your system as well. Other questions?
Two questions. First of all, desalination. Would it be good to have a system should there be incursion of salt water? And the other question is, we have both a swimming pool and an artesian well nearby. And has Bainbridge Prepares mapped all of these sources, and then how would you allocate that water?
Well, speaking to the second point first, we are doing our best to map all potential communal sources of water. Because if a neighbor needs water and another neighbor has it, maybe that's useful. Swimming pools and jacuzzis are a great source for the neighborhoods, okay? So long as you have the additional capabilities to purify that water before you consume it. Desalination systems. That is not the key to Rebecca. That's not the golden ticket to nirvana. If we have a challenge with a tsunami, and a tsunami comes in, specifically, if you've ever seen the film of the Fukushima earthquake, that wave is not simply bringing salt water. What else is it bringing? My answer to you is yes. I don't know what you all said, but the answer is yes, because it's bringing all that and more. It's bringing sewage. It's bringing oil. It's bringing lubricants. It's bringing fuel. It's bringing chemicals. If you can name it, it's bringing it in, okay? Now, the other side that people say is, well, you know, Fred, I don't live on the coast. I live on the highest point on Bainbridge Island. Or I live in a neighborhood that is not really subject to the tsunami zone. What else have we been doing on Bainbridge Island?
Map your neighborhood.
No, for decades and decades and decades. We've been fertilizing our soils. We have all sorts of contaminants in the soils that will eventually be shaken loose. And where is that stuff likely going to go? As Mike said, sediment likes to flow. That stuff is going to go into the water. So desalination systems are very useful for clean salt water. They are worthless in the residential sense for highly polluted water. There are large-scale, very, very large-scale industrial and municipal systems, desalination systems, that can handle contaminants. A residential system like that that's affordable, I have not yet seen. I have not yet seen. Other questions, please? Excellent. There will no doubt be more questions. We expect and we hope that more questions will come up in the days and months ahead. And we're going to be here to help you. I encourage you to take a card from TerraPhase to get their expertise when you need it. I encourage you to look on the Bainbridge Prepares website this coming week, because this video and presentation are going to be on the website for you. And make sure that you stay in contact with us. If you have questions, and if you have ideas, things that we haven't thought of, let us know. Absolutely let us know. This is a learning organization. We learn a heck of a lot from the folks with whom we work, okay? Thank you very, very much for your time. We appreciate it.